"Without reflecting that this is the only moment in which you can study character," said the Count. "On the steps of the scaffold, death tears off the mask that has been worn throughout life, and the real visage is disclosed. It must be allowed that Andrea was not very handsome, the hideous scoundrel. Come, dress yourselves, gentlemen, dress yourselves." Franz felt it would be ridiculous not to follow his two companions' example. He assumed the costume and fastened on the mask that scarcely equaled the pallor of his own face. Their toilet finished, they descended. The carriage awaited them at the door. Filled with sweetmeats and bouquets, they fell into the line of carriages. It is difficult to form an idea of the perfect change that had taken place. Instead of the spectacle of gloomy and silent death, the Piazza del Popolo presented a spectacle of gay and noisy mirth and revelry. A crowd of masks flowed in from all sides, emerging from the doors, descending from the windows. From every street and every corner drove carriages filled with clowns, harlequins, dominoes, mummers, pantomimists, transteverins, knights, and peasants. Screaming, fighting, gesticulating, throwing eggs filled with flour, confetti, nosegays, attacking with their sarcasms and their missiles friends and foes, companions and strangers, indiscriminately, and no one took offense, or did anything but laugh. Franz and Albert were like men who, to drive away a violent sorrow, have recourse to wine, and who, as they drink, become intoxicated, feel a thick veil drawn between the past and the present. They saw, or rather continued to see, the image of what they had witnessed, but little by little the general vertigo seized them, and they felt themselves obliged to take part in the noise and confusion. This is tapping into something, a personal experience I can't quite put my finger on. I don't know if it's like something along the lines of you lose someone close to you, but you're in a circumstance where you're not allowed the time or space to grieve, like in school maybe, where the beat goes on, the people around you have no awareness of what you're going through, and so you really just fall into line with everything that's happening in a sort of fugue state. I'm using the you terminology here, but I'm trying to pinpoint my own experience as to why watching Franz and Albert go about the carnival, like that line there, I think really kicked it off for me, where it starts that second paragraph. Franz felt it would be ridiculous not to follow his two companions' example. He assumed the costume and fastened on the mask, ... Where it's like, this dude just passed out. He just woke up. He saw something that he'll never forget, and now he has to go act normal. And not just normal, but like take part in festivities. Oh, actually, I'm starting to wrap my head around this memory that's emerging. I'm going to share it with you in detail, but like I think there was something along the lines of I had to go to a wedding, and the morning of I found out someone had passed away, and what do you do in that? Like, you still go to the wedding. You don't want to overshadow the wedding with what has happened, especially if the people at the wedding don't know the person that passed away. And so you're stuck in a weird middle ground, really having to mask in order to get through all the social expectations and interactions you have to do. It's kind of dizzying. It's a weird, out-of-body and surreal experience, and I imagine that's what not only Franz and Albert are experiencing, but I think that's what Dumas wants us, the readers, to kind of feel too, because since he's rooting this in Franz's experience, that entire dizzying second paragraph, or third paragraph, where he's explaining about what it was like to enter into the streets, where I'm not even going to read it again, but that long list of the clowns and the harlequins and all the things and costumes you're seeing on the street, and how everybody is acting by screaming and fighting and throwing eggs, and just how noisy it is, and that it's friends, it's enemies. They're doing nothing but laughing because this is carnival and no one takes offense to any behavior. Like, holy crap, that is a wild experience to walk into at any time, but specifically after witnessing an execution. But then again, everybody else here has witnessed it as well. So it's just Franz and Albert who are unacquainted with the Roman way of life, I guess. And I'm going to ask you a question again. I'm trying to be better about asking questions rather than making speculations, but the idea of Dante manipulating and setting up these situations to influence people, you think of Franz in the cave on Monte Cristo, or everything he did with Morel. Is this part of some plan to discombobulate Franz and Albert for some purpose? Is he using Carnival to shake them up a bit? It's hard to say. It's hard to say. One of the things that I find that I can't unsee now after reading his biography is how much Dumas is really interested in performance, both in his work, but also in public life. So then it becomes interesting to see his characters in public life versus performances in his stories themselves, because Dumas he was a bit of a socialite. He saw himself, whenever he stepped out of his home, as someone giving a performance. He always had a witty bon mot to give to anyone at a dinner party. He was always the center of attention. He was always putting on the Dumas show. And so I think that whether that's intentional in his writing, which it feels like it is, or if that's just osmosis from who he was as a human being, it's unignorable in his stories now. And that's an interesting lens that we can look at this story and his other stories through, that to me makes the auteur argument a bit more interesting. I don't really like the auteur theory. As we've disproven many times here on the show, there's not one singular voice moving through things, but when you do have one person in that equation applying a certain amount of psychological pressure from themselves onto the story, I don't want to go so far as to call it a fingerprint, but when you can examine that work after work, suddenly it becomes an interesting thing to analyze over time through different pieces. And again, I'm a cinephile, so I'm always thinking in terms of film, but the idea of these kind of unsolvable mysteries, these puzzle boxes in David Lynch's work, or the idea of fatherhood, whether it's a corrupt father, an absent father, a surrogate father in Wes Anderson's work. It becomes interesting when you pick up on that, the added commentary it adds to a story. So what do we think the idea of performance in its various forms is saying about the Count of Monte Cristo? I don't know enough just yet without knowing the end and where it's going, but the idea of masking using performance to craft or avoid identity is interesting. How does that deepen the psychology of the characters? I'd love to know what you think about that. Reach out to me any way you can, and let's continue through chapter 36. I think we're just going to be experiencing Carnival here in Rome, as the chapter title says. So join me here tomorrow for a bit more of the festivities. Until then, okay, goodbye. The Countdown of Monte Cristo is part of the Gruntwork Podcast Network. This show is produced, edited, and hosted by Landon Solano. The original text of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Theme song by Magic Solo. If you want to support the show and others like it, visit patreon.com/gruntworkpod. Thank you for listening. See you tomorrow.